Today, I'm going to predict the Texans players' stats for the 2019 season. And I'm only doing the offensive players because I feel like those are really the only players people care about. If you guys want one on the defense, then comment down below depending how this video does, the response from you guys. Then maybe in the future I'll do one for the defense as well. But for the most part, I feel like doing one on the defense will be kind of boring because people only really care about interceptions and sacks, and I feel like interceptions themselves are hard to predict. Sacks, it's kind of easy. I could just say, J.J. Watt will have 2 sacks. Clowney will have 11 or something like that, So I feel like sacks will be a little bit easier to predict, but like interceptions and stuff, a little bit harder. But yeah, anyways, let's get to this. Let's start off with Deshaun Watson. Now, last year, Deshaun Watson had 4,165 yards passing through the air. This season, I'm predicting Deshaun Watson will have 4,800 yards. Obviously, a little bit more, a little bit less, but around 4,800 yards, which is like over 600 more than he had last year. Now we're moving on to his passing touchdowns. Last year he had 26. This year I think he'll have 34 passing touchdowns, which is 8 more than last year, which is a good chunk more. And last year he had 9 interceptions. This year I'm predicting he'll have 10. And I know some people are going to be like, whoa, there is no way Deshaun throws more interceptions this year than he did last year because, he's a young player, he's improving. And I get that, don't get me wrong. But the reason I think Deshaun will throw more interceptions this year, or even though it's just one, the reason why I think Deshaun is more likely to throw more interceptions this year is because last year you got to keep in mind, the Texans had a terrible O-line. There was 2 or 3 games that Deshaun Watson played with messed up ribs, so Bill O'Brien kind of toned it down on the passing. And just in general, last year, we ran the ball probably a lot more than we usually would or we could have if we had a better O-line. And I feel like this year the O-line will improve, even if it's just slightly. And plus, I've said it before, the addition of Carl Smith, the quarterback's coach, I feel like he will teach Watson some things or two. Watson will get rid of the ball quicker, thus resulting in more passing attempts. So if there's more passing attempts, I think there will also be at least a chance for more interceptions. Now, his rushing stats. Last year, he had 551 rushing yards. This year, I feel like he'll have less. I'm going at around 300. I feel like this year, Deshaun's not going to have to scramble as much. Hopefully this year, Fuller and Kiki are healthy. Hopefully the O-line's better. Hopefully the Texans are able to use the tight ends since the O-line will hopefully be better. So Watson will run less. Rushing touchdowns, last year Deshaun had 5. This year I think he'll have 4. Completion percentage, last year Deshaun had a 68.3% completion percentage, which is already good. But this year, I think Deshaun will have a 70.1 completion percentage. And that's very, very hard to do. That means he's going to hit on 70% of his passes. So that's like Drew Brees-esque right there, man. And I think Deshaun can definitely pull it off. Last year, there were some very easy throws that Deshaun missed that he could have easily made. And I feel with a better O-line, Deshaun will be able to hit those. Now let's move on to DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins this season, I have him at 110 receptions, 1,450 yards, and 10 touchdowns. So, it's a little bit toned down compared to last year. Last year he had over 1,500 yards, I believe 11 touchdowns. 115 receptions or something like that. So I think this year it'll be a little toned down. And I feel the reason for that will be Kiki hopefully playing a whole season. Fuller playing more than 8 games. The addition of Kahali Waring. as well as Jordan Thomas eating into some of that production that would go to DeAndre Hopkins. Because, last year, like I said before, the tight ends had to stay back and help the O-line. Hopefully this year things change. Now let's move on to Will Fuller. Will Fuller, I have him playing 13 games next year. And I feel like I have to include that stat because Will Fuller's injury prone. So let's include games played for Will Fuller. Will Fuller will play 13 games. I don't think Will Fuller will play all 16 plus games next season, but I feel like he'll play a majority of them. And in those 13 games, I think Will Fuller will have 63 receptions, 1,000 yards, and 12 touchdowns. Will Fuller is an explosive weapon. I know it sounds kind of crazy. Oh my God. 1,000 yards with only 63 receptions. But that's Will Fuller, guys. Will Fuller is an explosive receiver. He gets chunk yards. That's what he does. And as far as the touchdowns, I do think he'll have more touchdowns than DeAndre Hopkins because, again, that's what Will Fuller does with Deshaun Watson. He's just that deep threat weapon, that home run player. And I feel like that Fuller and Deshaun connection is really, really underrated. Everyone talks about Deshaun to DeAndre, but people forget Deshaun to Fuller. Deshaun to Hopkins is a great connection. Don't get me wrong. It's probably one of the best connections in the NFL, if not the best connection in the NFL. But Deshaun to Will Fuller, in my opinion, is a more dangerous connection because of the big playability. Now let's move on to Keke QT. Keke, as well as Fuller, I'm going to include games played. I think Keke plays all 16 games. I feel like last year for Keke was a fluke. Keke over there in Texas Tech was never known as an injury-prone player. In fact, Keke himself said that he changed the way he approaches things to avoid those soft tissue injuries. So this year, I think Keke will play 16 games, and I think in those 16 games, he will have 70 receptions for 750 yards and 4 touchdowns. Now, you're probably wondering, whoa, 70 receptions, 750 yards, that's like 10 yards per reception. And yeah, that's what Keke is. He's that underneath guy, that short yardage situation guy. And that's fine. I think Keke works well there. I mean, Keke does have some deep playability, but we didn't see him do that with the Texans last year. He did it at Texas Tech, but who knows how the Texans will utilize Keke. I'm just going off of what he did last year for the Texans. Obviously, they could put more on his plate, but I don't know what Bill O'Brien and Deshaun are planning to do with Keke. Now, next guy is Jordan Thomas. I'm predicting Jordan Thomas will have 40 receptions, 500 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Nothing special. He's still a pretty young player. Very young player, actually, going into his second year. So I think he'll be more involved, obviously being the number 1 tight end, and also not having to stay back and help the O-line as much anymore. Now, the next guy I got is Kahali Waring. I have him getting 25 receptions, 350 yards, and 1 touchdown. I think Kahali Waring will be the Texans' number 2 tight end at the start of the season. I feel like it'll stay that way for majority of the season, although he will be playing number 2 tight end role behind Jordan Thomas. I do think the Texans will utilize 2 tight ends set a lot, but I feel like Kahali Waring will probably stay back and block a little bit more at first, and then eventually they'll let him go out there and do damage in the passing game. Now, the next guy I have is Lamar Miller. I have Lamar Miller getting 160 rushing attempts, 750 yards for an average of 4.6 yards per carry, 3 rushing touchdowns, 30 receptions, 275 receiving yards, and 1 receiving touchdown. I know that sounds like a lot, but I feel like this year they're really gonna split carries. Lamar Miller will split carries with Deontay Foreman this year. Last year and years prior, where Alfred Blue was the number 2 back. I feel like Lamar Miller carried like 75% of the load, and Blue carried 25% of it. This year, I feel like it'll be literally 50-50. Now, D'Onta Foreman, I have him getting 185 rushing attempts, 900 rushing yards, for an average of 4.8 yards per carry, 8 rushing touchdowns. The reason why I think Foreman will have more rushing touchdowns than Miller is because Foreman is the bigger back. I feel like he'll be used more in those red zone situations. And receiving wise, Foreman I feel like will have 20 receptions for 150 yards. I think the Texans will utilize Lamar Miller more than D'Onta Foreman in the passing game as a receiving back, I guess. Now, you're probably, if you add it up for whatever reason, you added up the yards that I had receiving for Deshaun Watson. Keep in mind that the Texans still have Jordan Akins, DeAndre Carter, Vincent Smith, Darren Fells, Cullen Gillespie, and those other back of the roster players. So keep in mind all of Deshaun Watson's passing yards. Don't just go to DeAndre, Will, Kiki, Jordan, wearing Lamar Miller and D'Onta Foreman. There's also some smaller backup players that they'll get a few receptions and a few yards. So keep that in mind. Anyways, that's all I have for you guys for today. If you guys want to, feel free to comment down below your own predictions on the stats our players will have next season. Might take a while, but hey, if you wanna, just put it out there, let me know whatever, then comment down below. And yeah, be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys later. Peace.